Well, I am so excited about this conversation today. And Jennifer, I want to welcome you to the Redeem Her Time podcast. You and I are both Midwest girls, but I didn't know who you were until just a few months ago. And I'll share about how I got to know who you are in just a minute. But I want you to tell us about you. What are you juggling in this season of midlife? And what is the work that God has called you to in this time, in this place?
Well, thank you for having me. I know already we have so much in common because the idea of redeeming her time just fits exactly with my ministry online and in books. So this is going to be a great conversation. I'm really pumped up about it. So I'm on a farm in Northwest Iowa. I am the wife of a fifth generation farmer. So Lee men and women have been taking care of this ground since 5 years after the Civil War ended.
Wow,
5
that is
generations.
history.
It is so cool to look out on this land and know that we've been a part of a food production industry for that long and caring for God's land and
Mm,
stewarding it well. We've also grown some other things, including children. We have two adult daughters. One just graduated from Iowa State University, and she's headed to grad school at Cambridge University in the UK.
oh, wow.
Yeah, and our other daughter is finishing up college and is going into long-term mission. She really has a heart for people who have never heard the name of Jesus.
Mm,
So she is most likely, God willing, going to Southeast Asia, which is literally on the other side of the world. Like if I were to drill a hole through the center of the earth, I would land about where she's probably going to be if
wow.
she and the Lord have have their
Right.
way, and the Lord generally has his way, right? So it's been an adjustment when you ask, juggling in this season of midlife. It's not at all what I thought it was going to be like. I thought I'd have, kids just graduating from college and maybe, settling down somewhere in the Midwest and it's just so wild how God has these plans for our children and then you look on the playback of your life and on the playback of their life and you're like, aha, I see the seeds
Mm,
that you were planting clear back then, and it makes sense. As a mama, it's hard because they're so far away, but it's really exciting to see God moving and that they've remained close to the Lord. Juggling also just this season of life where my father passed away recently, and my mother is, aging. She's 85 years old. So, I have the joy of having wonderful parents and the joy of getting to be a part of their care from time to time. And then, in addition to that, I am an acquisitions editor for a publishing company called Bethany House Publishers. So I help other authors bring their
mm.
books to life in addition to writing my own books and Bible studies. So when I say all that, you're probably like, you wrote this book called Growing Slow, and it doesn't sound like you're growing slow. It sounds like things are really fast and hectic. But I can assure you that I've put things into place and that I hope that we
Mhm.
can talk about today that are about redeeming the time.
Mm.
And I'm still able to enjoy so many things in my life, so many wonderful things, and able to, I hope, bless other women with my work, but also to be able to find times for really adequate, good rest in the Lord.
Yes, yes, amen and amen. And what's so interesting is I'm thinking and listening to you talk, right? And my kids are spread out as well, not quite so far. But I think we often think we're magically going to have more time in this season of life, right? Like when the kids grow up and when they go off to college, when they graduate, when they settle, all of a sudden we're going to magically have all this time. And yet, really we can be just as busy and just as scattered and distracted, and like you said, you've got aging parents on the other end, and that's why we really come down to the fact that our busyness is not a calendar issue or even a season of life issue. It's a heart issue. And so I love that that's what you're getting at. And what I'm hearing is that you're not just busy, like on the hamster wheel busy, but you're busy, I'm going to say that in quotes, doing the things that God has called you to. And there's a big difference between just checking boxes or running from one thing to the next and doing what you were put here to do. So I love
Mm.
that. I love that. So I said
Listen,
that.
I love the way you said that too. That is so critical. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of times people miss that.
Yeah.
They think that rest means that you have to like just throw your hands in the air and say, well, I guess I'm just going to have to let all this go and go on in the middle of a lake on a floaty, but life doesn't work like that. We
Right.
have great assignments from the Lord. We have things that are sometimes stressful in our lives that we need to manage, that are in our purview. And God is calling us to do those things and equipping us for those things.
Mm.
So you really nailed it. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Well, look at Jesus' example, right? He wasn't sitting around in his floaty. Yes,
Right.
yes, he did sit and, eat and drink, right? And have conversations, but they were intentional. And, yes, he got away with his father, but then he also was always on mission and he knew what was his to do and what wasn't.
Hmm.
And was never too busy for the people and things that, that God had put him for. So that's the model that we're following, right?
Yep. Busiest guy
Yeah.
ever to walk the face of the earth.
Exactly. And he had
He
like
really
3 years
was.
to save the world,
Right.
like let's talk about, pressure and lack of time, right? And yet, yeah, he did exactly what he was supposed to. And with the same limits on time that we do. He had 24 hours in a day too, right? So I love that. So well, so good. So here's how, just so you guys know backstory, how I met Jennifer. After I was a guest on the Hustle Sanely podcast with Jess Massey, shout out to Jess, woohoo. I asked her who she thought I should know. And immediately, Jennifer, she thought of you and your message around unhurrying our heart. And it was perfect timing because I literally was about to head out on a road trip. And I was like, I need a good book to bring. And so I found your book, Growing Slow. And I just got to be honest, I couldn't put it down. So I
Mm.
feel like you've been with me this summer and it's just been so neat and the parallels between Growing Slow and Redeem Her Time. And so that's what kind of, fostered this conversation. So thank you for accepting my invitation to be here. I would love to start with why you wrote this book. And in particular,
Mhm.
the story about when you were in your doctor's office with this choice about what to do with the pace of your calendar and ultimately your heart.
Great question. So, first of all, I could have more easily written a book called Growing Fast
Ah,
because that's the pace that I lived up until probably my early 40s, about the time that I went into the doctor's office. And I had been I'd gone to a lot of, regular Western doctors, my primary care physician. I had a lot of random symptoms, and it was making me think, am I losing my mind? But I
mm,
had like brain fog, I had gut issues, I had sleep issues. I was getting random fevers for no apparent reason.
mm,
And we did a lot of tests. And um, the doctor just said, there's really nothing wrong. You're getting into midlife. It's maybe it's premenopausal, so we just don't know. And but yet I just couldn't get on top of it. So I went to a functional med doctor, which is more kind of natural medicine, which really isn't the way that I roll, but I'm like, I am just going to try this out. And he just said, he listened to me, he just paid attention to every bit of my well-being. And he said, basically, you have something like a hurried heart. It's really like hurry sickness,
mm,
and there isn't a pill for it. There's not something, I can't give you a shot or a regimen. It's about what's happening on your inside. You are stressed out. And I'm like, I'm not stressed out. I am not a stressed out person. This is my pace. I've been at this pace for my whole life. This is the way that Jennifer Dukesley rolls. He's like,
mm.
well, I'm telling you, that is why. And I went home, and of course I consulted with Dr. Google to see, because that's what I always do
Right. Why
with
not?
any diagnosis. And sure enough, there was a lot of conversation about this idea of hurry sickness. And I went down the list of symptoms and checked. I checked every box. It was like, this
Mhm,
is so me. And even the fevers, I would get like a low grade fever, 99 to 100. There are these fevers that you can get from hurry
mm,
and stress. And my body was telling me something about my pace, and
mm.
that is that I could no longer run at the pace that I did in my 20s. I'm getting older, and nor should I have really been living at that pace in my 20s and my 30s,
Right.
because looking back, and we can talk about this later too, but it was impacting a lot of my life, that
Mm.
I couldn't go back and change.
Wow.
Relationships, the way I felt about myself, the way I felt about my work, the way I felt about my future, the way I felt about my faith. Like nearly every area of life had been negatively impacted by
Mm.
a sickness that I didn't even know I had.
Isn't that crazy? Okay, and here's what's so surreal. When I read this story in your book, I was like, no way. Because I too sat across from a doctor and got the diagnosis Hystericus globus. And I remember just looking at him and being like, what is that? And he had this like funny smirk on his head. So my quick story, I was like you. It was the growing fast and always something to do and someone to serve and who has time to slow down. And I felt like I had a ball in my throat at all times. And I thought maybe I just wasn't chewing my food well or wasn't drinking, drinking to wash it down. So I got really intentional, slowed that down, and it didn't change. And you know how you just kind of ignore things like that, right? And so, like, after a year, I was like, okay, I have had thyroid issues in the past. Maybe there's something growing in there that I need to go get checked out. So I promised my friends I would go and do that. They scoped, they tried things for acid reflux, they yada yada. He sits me down. He's like, yeah, there is no ball in your throat. We've scoped it. I've looked, there's nothing there. You have Hystericus globus, globus meaning ball, hystericus, and he's like circled his finger next to his head, meaning it's in your head. You're crazy. Because hystericus is where they get the word hysterectomy from. They thought women in midlife were going crazy, right? But here's the thing. He did not tell me it wasn't about my calendar, it was about my heart and soul. Instead, he offered me a pill for my hurry sickness. But I knew
Mm,
that was not the solution, right? Like, so I turned it down because I knew, like you, that the cure was going to be an inside only job that I could only do with God. And I'm so glad that that happened because God got my attention. I started learning to grow slow and not grow fast. And that's actually what led to Redeem Her Time being born, so that I could help women not feel like they're somehow always behind, even when they're working really hard, and doing really good things. And like how to actually live like there is enough time and I'm not in a rush and I'm doing life and business on God's time. So it's just so interesting how such similar things there. So let's talk about hurry sickness, AKA busyness, right? I mean, it's so funny that would not have been a diagnosis however many years ago, right? But I'm sure right now it's going undiagnosed for a lot of women. We have a lot of distractions and demands in our time and life and business and ministry. So let's dive into this some more. Like, why do you think this is a problem or a struggle for women, especially those of us in this season of midlife? And then you touched on this a minute ago, but like, what does that start costing us
mhm.
personally, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a problem and struggle for women in midlife in particular because the reality is a lot of us are dealing with both aging parents
Mm,
and maybe junior high or teenage kids that they're just a lot.
yeah,
And, even for women who aren't married or um, have kids, we start to have a lot of other health issues, or I think about single women who just are doing almost everything on their own, but still
yeah,
may have aging parents and have a yard to care for and have,
sure.
maybe sisters or siblings. Like there's just a lot where a lot of women I know have that caregiver sense to them and they want to give their all to their job and their home and their kids and their friends and their church, and it's just give, 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 and we sit last on how
Mm,
are we going to take care of us and who's taking care of us. So
yeah,
that's just, I think, over the years, like just forever, it's kind of been like this for women. Honestly, I think
right.
it's not just a right now thing, but it's gotten worse, of course, in the last 20 years or so with the advent of social media. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, right? We go on our social media and we see that, we'll see somebody out there, killing it with their exercise routine. We'll see somebody else out there with a beautiful
Mm,
home. We see
mm-hmm.
somebody else out there with great fashion sense or going on vacations or, getting on a New York Times bestseller list or whatever the thing is, right? And so we take all of those, 10 different people and we put them all together and say, I need to do all of those things.
Yeah, right
And
now.
I have to be all of that. And
Mm,
and even though all of those people are just one, we conflate them all
mm,
and think this is what I need to be and do. And that was not really a way of thinking before we had such immediate access into other people's lives.
right.
So yeah, and it does affect us personally. It does cost us personally. And yeah, hitting on a few of those. I think faith wise, and when I'm in that mode of hurry sickness, then my time with God feels like I don't have time for that. I'll get
Mm,
to that later. My body, I don't have time for exercise. I'll get to that later. Family and friendships and communication with them. It's like,
mm,
I'm maybe having a conversation with them, sort of, but I'm also looking at my phone and not
yes.
really truly connecting with them. Really every area of life is affected when you're constantly in a hurry.
Yeah, yeah. And you said, it's really resonating with me. You said this in the book, not being fully present to the best moments that are unfolding right around us. Because for example, like our kids, right? They were itty bitties just the other day, and now they're going halfway around the world. And what are we missing out on, right? When that we already have in front of us when we're always looking somewhere else or to the next thing, and that's something we talk about a lot here on the podcast and inside my program, because hurry and busyness costs us a lot. And, you don't see any plants outside, because we're going to be talking about farm stuff here in a minute, that are running around, right? And rooted at the same time. Like it's not possible. I think about like John 15, right? And we are to abide, right? Abiding does not mean running around and being on a hamster wheel. And, it means being rooted, which means if we're not rooted, we're not going to see the fruit, which is that harvest. And I just recently I'm rereading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And in there, he said that hurry and love, right? The two things we're called to, loving God and loving others, can't coexist either. But somehow we're still always in a hurry, and we wonder why we don't see the results we're hoping or praying for, why life is so passing by so quickly. And honestly, none of us wants to get to the end of our day, only look back with regret, right? That life was a blur. And like you said, we mistook success for meaning, and we ran so hard, we forgot to walk with God, right? Because he invites us to walk with him and to take on his yoke. And that's something we teach inside the With God framework and doing that. So we all would say busyness is not where we want to stay. But let's be honest, it's really hard to do. So like, how do we start changing or growing in this area? Pun intended, because your book is called Growing Slow. So let's maybe start with what exactly is growing slow, and why is this what's actually going to bring that lasting cure to our hurry sickness?
That's a great question. And how I learned the way of growing slow was by watching the way of growing crops.
Mm,
So I didn't grow up on this farm. It's my husband's farm. I lived in a small town, but I didn't live and have, day-to-day access to the growth of a farm. And what I began to see was a metaphor unfolding
mm,
every spring, summer, fall, and winter. And it was a metaphor that Jesus used quite a bit. He talked in farming metaphors a lot, and I was seeing it come alive right outside my kitchen window. And what I began to understand is that you don't plant and harvest at the same
mm,
time.
mm,
And the growth is nearly imperceptible day by day. But one day you look out your window and the corn is tasseling, and some months later you're harvesting it. And if God was comparing our lives as if they were fields and with seeds to be grown, and if He is, I see Him like a divine farmer,
mm,
and we are seeds that He plants in the land that is our life. And at the same time, He's planting seeds in us.
mm,
And, He grows crops slowly over time. And the growth that happens first is growth that goes down. It's
mm.
the rootedness. And,
Yes.
for most of our lives, we've been told, grow up, hurry up. But God does not say grow up. He's telling us to grow down, down, down into the heart of things and to be rooted in Christ,
Mm,
as it says in Colossians. So that metaphor unfolded in my own life, and I began to make changes in my life that mimicked a growing slow way, which was super scary because I thought I'm not going to be do well on in my job anymore. I'm going to have to say no to things. I'm going to I'm going to disappoint people if
mm,
I change my pace. But it's exactly what I needed to do. And there were some surprises along the way that I can tell you about. For instance, I'm actually more productive in my work now, and have more meaning in my work than I ever have now that I'm living the growing slow way. I literally tell my office good night at 5 o'clock every night.
mm,
Say good night to the office, even though there is always work to be done. There's always going to be work to be done. There's never an end to it, but there's got to be an end to the day. And so
yes.
when I put an end to the day and put a period on the day, when I wake up the next
Mm,
morning, I am energized and ready for work and able to give my all in a way that isn't from a place of weariness, but from a place of rest and restoration. And as a result, my work is feels much more meaningful. I'm getting more done by growing slow than growing fast. I'm making fewer mistakes, and I'm making time for rest and connection with people and with God.
Isn't it so interesting how kingdom life is almost, to the world, it looks like the upside down, right, kingdom, but yet it is really essentially how God created the rhythms of, of life and of the earth and things like that to grow. As you're talking, I was thinking about the parable of the soils, right? And
Mhm.
those seeds that got scattered on different soils, the ones that weren't rooted and
Mhm.
didn't really get the roots down, they just withered away. So, it looked like, oh wow, look at that fruit. Oh, look at that, that grew up fast, but yet none of it lasted. It was only the one that was in the good soil that got the roots down. And then God brought the abundant harvest, right? The 30, 60, 100 fold, which is such a beautiful thing to watch. And I love that you've had this like front row picture to that time in between. I've quoted you saying that you don't sow and harvest in the same season so many times since I read that, because I think so often we want to see the instant gratification, right? We want the instant success. I want the, right now. And there is time and trust in between those seasons and what that looks like. So I want to kind of talk about those different seasons that you've gotten to watch out your window. Now, I'm not a farmer's wife, but I do live in Southern Illinois where there are a lot of farms that I'm surrounded by. So I get to see these types of things too. But I can only imagine when it's your field and your crops and your livelihood, how much attention you're giving to watching that. And what really struck me too is how much land, seeds, dirt, like all these agricultural terms are used in scripture. And I love that God makes things so practical. And then, like you
Mhm.
said, gives us this beautiful metaphor. So I want to walk through the different seasons and just kind of just hit on a few nuggets. I mean, there's so many things I could have pulled out of each season, and I, didn't want to be here all day, so I just pulled out a few that we can just talk a little bit about. And let's start with spring, because that's where you started in your book, and spring is a time for planting. And like I said, I'm not a farmer, but I do know you need two things in the season of spring. You need fields and you need seeds, right? So tell us a little bit about, because you talk about us studying and knowing our fields, like where we're called to plant, like what does that mean? And then when we have the seeds, which don't look like much, what's that process like of actually planting in those fields where
Mhm.
we're called to?
Yeah, Lisa, that's great. I'm glad we're going to go through these seasons. And before we get to the seasons, I'm going to piggyback on something you said about land in the Bible. This is interesting. In the Old Testament, land is the fifth most common noun in the Old Testament.
Wow.
The word is eretz, E-E-T-Z, and it comes behind Lord, Kingdom, Son, God, the fifth most common. And I think it's so cool to consider the fact that our Bible, our whole story doesn't exist in some ethereal way. It's not like it's not a philosophy. That's our religion's not a philosophy. It unfolded in real times and places. And the land wasn't just a backdrop to the story. It's really like a central character. You're moving out of, it started in land with the garden, and then they were moved out of land. They were into, soon into, the exodus from land to the promised land, wandering around in land for a long time. And, when Jesus is here, he's walking us through real places that we can visit today. And then in Revelation, I mean, it's growing slow the Bible is a growing slow story because that ending isn't even here, but it also ends in land on a new earth with real places. And I imagine it like a big old blissful farm, and much like what God originally intended. So when we think about spring, to your question about the season of spring, when God gives us seeds to plant, he's saying, plant the seeds where I have planted you.
Mm.
That is good soil right where we are. And plant the seeds where we are. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. And it doesn't always feel that way.
Oh,
And you
right.
look across the fence and it looks like somebody else's field is better soil, it's greener, the grass is greener, the crops are greener, it's more
Sure.
productive. But God is saying, be faithful to the land that is your life in this place that I have given
Mm.
you. And when we do on the farm, when we plant those seeds, we plant literally millions of seeds. And it can take up to 2 weeks before we see any growth at all. Because
Wow.
again, in spring, that's where you are getting rooted down. So if you're in a spring season of your life right now, listening to this, and you have planted things and you are not seeing growth, just give it a little bit of time because
Mm.
God is watering the seeds and you will see growth.
And what I love is that that work is being done where no one else can see, right? I just
Mhm.
was reading about just God knowing all of our days and thinking about how he created us in the womb, right? In this dark place where no one else could see. That's where God was doing that first work. And the same thing is happening with these seeds. And then the beauty of it, Jesus talks about this, right? That seed has to die in order to grow. Right. And like, who wants to? We just want the growth. I want the spring green. I want to see the shoots coming up. I want to see, the flowers starting to bloom and things like that. And yet, understanding it's in this process of the seed itself breaking apart that then the roots can be put down and all of that. So, around here, we talk about the 8 areas of attention. And so, I'm equating that to what our fields are. What is it in your family relationships that God has called you to plant, in your friendships, in your business or ministry? In your financial stewardship, in your wellness, in your passions, in your dwelling, in your walk with him. Those are the fields that we're called to plant in. And when we are faithful to take the time to put those seeds in, then God can do that next part. I'm guessing you can't just have a bin full of seed and in the back 40 and expect there to be a harvest. You have to take the time to go out there and plant those seeds and get that, be part of that process, right?
Mhm, mhm. That's so good. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to get out there and get our hands dirty. And yeah, I always think when I'm planting seeds in metaphorically in life, I really do picture God as this divine farmer who is working the land of my life, working the land of my heart to
Mm.
plant good seeds in it, even as I'm planting seeds into the world.
Yeah, what a beautiful, yes, we're being planted in as we then are planting in others. It's such a beautiful picture. Okay, let's move on to summer. This is
Hmm.
a favorite season for a lot of people because the work part is done. Like you said, the
Right.
dirty work, right? The sun is shining, it's warm. I would guess that, that's actually probably maybe some downtime for farmers because the fields are done. Now it's just the waiting. Because, like you said, we don't sow and harvest in the same season. So there has to be this time of slow growth in the middle and we have to wait for that. And I'm sure you're watching the skies, you're watching the weather apps, and all of that. I don't know if farmers still say knee high by the 4th of July, but I know we'd always be watching to see how the corn was coming up and things like that. So what does waiting for growth look like in the summer season? And how do we, what's our role in that waiting process? So
Hmm.
that way, yeah, we're not just off taking a nap under the tree, but what's our
Hmm.
role in that?
So in summer seasons on a farm, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's a little bit of a slower time in the sense that we've done the work. The seeds are in the ground. There are things to do, of course, but it really is a reliance on God for rain and sun and all the things that need to make a plant grow. On the other hand, summer times can be really stressful because we fear, damage from insects or hail
Mm-hmm.
storms, or we had a derecho, which is a major windstorm a few years ago that really wreaked havoc on the plants. So you can have a bright and sunny day, and the next morning you wake up and you have a disaster in the field. And in
Yeah.
the summer of our life, it can be like that too. We can reach summers of our life when, we finally see growth in the business. We finally see growth in the children. We don't have to hover over them all the time and tell them to cross the street and put their seatbelts on. And, we're just seeing growth and maturity happen. But it's almost like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, here's growth, but what if a storm comes out of nowhere? Like a windstorm in my life,
Yeah.
something that damages the growth. And there's still then a reliance on God to get us through those storms. And one thing
Mhm.
that's true about crops is also true about people, that if we are deeply rooted, that we can manage through those
Mhm.
storms of summer in a lot different way than if we are not rooted. And I've even seen it in windstorms where the corn stalks are at an angle and you're like, how in the world is
Are
there
they holding
anything going to
on?
grow off that plant? And growth does happen, and it's because of the plant's roots that keep it growing till harvest.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's so amazing when you do pull something out of the ground, you see how far that root goes down, and you're like, wow, no wonder it
Mhm,
was hanging on through the storms. Right. And what
mhm.
was coming to my mind was just life happening.
Yeah.
Like we do our part and we're expectant in the spring, season of, of what the growth is going to be. And yet sometimes in that in between, there is life happening. But what I love is that God is still over all of it. right? It's not like all is, even if it looks like the crop is lost, he still is in the process and we can trust him in that. One of the things that really stood out to me in this section about the summer was how you talked about boundaries. And I was thinking about like, this is a way that we protect what we've planted. And you tell this story about this, like, I think it was a pig or something that came running into your yard. I could just see it, right? And I'm thinking, I mean, like, we've got a garden, right? But I'm going to just tell you, those deer like to go in and take everything. And so, like so often, well, we have to put up boundaries around what we want to grow. Otherwise, critters will take it, AKA those distractions. But then it also gives space for what's inside that actually has value and meaning to grow, right? Things that are important. And so maybe just talk to us a little bit about, yeah, how do we actively wait in a way that's also protecting what we've planted so it can get what it needs to grow during that summer season when we're in the
Mm.
waiting.
I think that the temptation in life I think most of us have fences
Mm,
around our lives and things that we want to protect. But the temptation is to keep expanding the fences, keep pushing
mm,
them out and out and out. And all of a sudden, we're like, how am I going to take care of all this? How am I going to do all this? And so to be really cautious about those moments of extending the fences and the boundaries and knowing when you need to just keep things pretty close. I always say that your no is as important as your yes. So it
yes,
may mean
yes.
that you need to say no to some things, some committees that before you would have said yes to, pushing out the fences, saying yes to another invitation to um, whatever it is, whatever your
Mm,
vocation is. I don't know what that looks like, but people are always going to ask us to do things, especially anybody who has a personality of getting things done and
right?
doing it well. There are people that are going to continue to ask, and it's hard for me personally to say no because I don't want to disappoint people.
Mm.
But I've learned to be very discerning in when to move the fence out.
Yeah. So it's so important because it can either be a distraction or it can be that divine invitation. And we really
Hmm.
need to take the time to slow down our yes, right? That's
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 good.
one of the things that I love is like we don't have to give a quick yes and
So
just
good.
assume because we were asked, either we have some obligation or there's some expectation, or how often do we say yes to something without really thinking about how this is going to have a ripple effect in our other yeses? And then we regret or resent that yes. The best yes by Lisa Turkhurst is a book I keep coming back to as
Mm.
well. We're actually about to start that in our book club inside my program because we need to pay attention to what we're saying yes to, and what we're not. So I love the fact that your no is as important as your yes because yeah, that's so important. So okay, now this is so fun because you and I are recording this, and this is going live literally the first full day of fall. And fall is my favorite season. I mean, who's not waiting for the pumpkin spice lattes and the leaves to turn colors and the cool to finally come and things like that. And I would guess that as a farmer's wife, you are really anticipating fall because it's like, yes, this is when all of our hard work and now our waiting has paid off, and we've got this harvest, and this is going to put food on the table and keep things running and things like that. So there are two parts to this that I saw you talk about in your book. So I want to kind of separate them. The first one is like, how do we be grateful for the growth that God brought and the fruit we get to harvest and not start taking it on like this was all of our doing
Mhm.
in this season?
Yes, harvests are complicated. And I'm going to speak broadly outside of the farm metaphor and speak directly to the woman who is kind of at the end of something. A
Mm,
harvest season in a human life might feel like sending the last kid out to college and then you're in an empty nest,
mm,
or you've hit retirement and you don't know what's next, or you had the wedding and now it's like, oh, that's over, this thing that we were going through, and now we got to figure out how to actually be married. I mean, harvest can look like a lot of different ways.
yeah.
Harvest can be saying goodbye to a city you've lived in for a very long time, and you
Mm,
knew it was coming to this, and this is what something that you had worked for. So you hold in one hand joy for having accomplished it, but
mm,
you hold in the other hand a kind of grief because it's over.
mm,
So um, it can be, to your point about um, being grateful for the growth. I think that is where we land in order to really cope with this transitional season of harvest in our lives. So I was a disaster when my girls went to college. That was a harvest season. I
yeah.
cried a lot And the thing that got me through is saying to myself all the time, this is what we raised them for.
Yeah.
They are doing good things in the world. They are moving forward. And Jennifer, that means that you get to move forward too. Your spring season is coming, but allow yourself to grieve this difficult place of a harvest, but also, as you say, to be grateful the growth that God brought
Mhm. Hmm.
to that point in life.
Okay, that is so beautiful. And I was just thinking about this, like, what would happen if a farmer didn't harvest, right, what was in their fields, and they just kind of let it keep going and growing? Like, yes, there's like this emptiness when that growth is gone, right? When those crops are no longer there, but you've just created space for that next thing. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
such a beautiful picture of, like you said, the season coming to an end of parenting, or maybe of a job or a ministry or even a relationship, which can be really,
Mm-hmm.
really hard. And just being expectant about what God is going to plant in that field next. And I like how you point out the two are so commingled, in that, because the harvest isn't always what we expect. We want to see all the beautiful, juicy, veggies and things like that. And yet sometimes it's bittersweet. I also want to talk about, like, how do we respond when the field next door looks like
Mm-hmm.
they're getting a whole lot more harvest and yielding? Again, I'm sure, not every field, is going to produce the exact same amount of crops. And we as women, we tend to compare our fields to other people's all the time, right? So how do we be content in the harvest that we have, and not make it about, well, so and so had this and I didn't, or even make ourselves feel better than, because our harvest looks, on the outside, to be maybe more abundant, than someone else's.
Yes. So, on a literal, perhaps funny way of talking about this, on Sunday afternoons, you probably see this in Illinois too, but you'll see farmers with their caps kind of cocked to the side and they're driving very slowly,
Mm,
looking around to the left and to the right, looking at fields that aren't their own, and often comparing growth. So,
mm.
farmers literally do that.
Yeah, interesting.
And yeah, and we do that too. We are, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, we do that looking online and seeing the harvest of other people's workout routines and their
Mm,
home decor and their whatever. I mean, the way they do quiet time, everything looks
mhm.
better
Yeah,
when it's put through a filter on Instagram. And the reality is, other people's harvests actually are larger,
mhm,
and sometimes ours is too. And how to get to that place of contentment is really about holding the bigger picture of eternity
mm,
and God's plan for our life at the forefront of our mind, and knowing that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also, as it
mm.
says in the Gospels, and to
Yeah,
trust that our God is so much more interested in our obedience in planting than he is in the results that we get out of the fields. He
right.
knows what is he's asking us to give it our all, but in the end, it is the results are on him and
Yeah,
not on us.
yeah.
And when we get to heaven someday and he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant," it won't be
Mhm.
about how much we, laid at his feet in terms of numbers or
Mm,
whatever that thing is. It's
mhm.
all about receiving his love in our life. And I think when you take that long view and that big picture view of eternity, it really helps to slow the comparison game in our own lives.
Yeah, we talk about the parable of the talents. I call it the
Oh,
parable of
yeah.
the servants, because it's really not about how much they had, like you said. The one was given 5 and ended up with 10, and one was given 2 and he doubled it, and the master said the same thing to both of them,
Hmm.
right? Because what they did is they didn't bury out of fear what they'd been given, that it would get away from them. They, in faith, invested it, which, yes, took some risk. It took some trust. It took some faith. It took a whole lot of things, but ultimately they recognized it didn't belong to them. And the purpose behind what they'd been given was not just for them, it was to build his kingdom. And we talk about that all the time with our time, right? We are called to be stewards of our time, not managers of our time. And
Hmm.
there's a huge difference, right, in what that looks like. And then, yes, it's up to God as to what that harvest is going to be. And anything that's bringing glory to him and building his kingdom is a win. So I thank you for that reminder, because I think someone need to hear, right, about that comparison and contentment, in all of that. Okay, so the last season we're coming around to is winter. And as you say in the book, and many of us know, this is the season that most of us try to escape, especially in the Midwest, because
Hmm.
it's cold, right? And so we're like, hey, let's go to Florida, right? But I love how you challenged us to look at winter from a different perspective and to not see it as something we just have to get through to get to the, the joy of spring and the fun of summer and then the harvest, and all that goes along with that. But like to actually see winter as a gift to treasure, because without it, we wouldn't have the growth of the other seasons. So maybe just kind of talk to us a little bit about what's the purpose of winter from a land point of view, and then of course a life point of view, and how do we not just wish it away, but
Hmm.
really embrace what's happening in that season,
In the Western culture, we tend to want to be in a constant cycle of spring planting, summer growth, fall harvest, skip winter. Spring
right?
planting, summer growth, fall harvest, skip winter. It is the way of the culture. But I look at on the farm and I see that for 1/4 of the growing season in a year, for 1/4, we are in a season of winter where it looks like nothing is growing, where it
Mm,
looks like there's no productivity. And it can feel depressing and it can feel boring and it can feel cold.
yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, on the farm, there are so many things that are happening under the soil that we can't see. I think about all the little animals hibernating and resting, and their
Mm,
tiny little heartbeats beneath there. The frost of winter kills disease cycles, so
mm,
that come spring, we have a healthier profile in order to plant. There are when snow falls around here, we call it poor man's fertilizer because it picks up nitrogen on the way down and feeds the soil with nitrogen. And then one of the most remarkable parts about what happens on the winter, in my view, is involving rocks. I don't know if where you grew up, if you've ever heard the term picking rock. But when I was a kid, that was my first job, was picking rock. And you went out to a farmer's field and you covered every square inch and picked up all the rocks, even a rock the size of a fist. And it's so funny they call it picking rock because um, there's a lot more than just one rock. There's a whole bunch of rocks, like hundreds or even thousands. And the reason these have to be picked up is so that they don't damage the equipment come spring.
mm,
The reason those rocks keep coming up every year is not because there's some rock fairy dropping stones on the field. It's because of the frost thaw cycle of
wow.
winter. So it moves those rocks up and out to the surface, and they have to be removed. We have to pick rock.
Mm,
And to bring that back around to us in winter seasons, we go through these seasons where God wants to pick rock in us, where we have things, stones long buried in our heart. And winter has a way of calling us to a place of rest and quiet so that God can say, I need to take those things out of you so that you can be healthier come come springtime when you're going to plant things in your life. There was
wow.
one winter where there was a rock so big in one of our fields that Scott tried to get it with his hands, too big, tried it with a shovel, too big. He had to get a skid loader to remove this rock. It was enormous. And the same is true for us. Like sometimes it's a little tiny pebble in our shoe that can be super annoying, but other times we might need God's skid loader to dig
Mm.
in and move the rocks so that we can have healthy hearts come spring.
Wow, that is so powerful. I've got like goosebumps thinking about that process and how God so wonderfully created that. And it's like the pruning process, right? I mean, if you're a vine dresser, the vine does not like being having parts of it cut off, but the vine dresser knows in order for the fruit to grow, in order for it to be tasty and sweet, you have to remove some of the things that are going to get in the way. And so that just is that beautiful thing with the rock there. And then we're back to spring, right? I love how God
Woohoo!
makes the seasons to perpetually cycle. So yes, winter is 1/4 of it, but it's not forever. But here's the thing, and I talk about this a lot around Redeem Her Time, that life and business is not always connected to a calendar. Oftentimes it's how we measure things, right? So like, how do we discern what season we're in? And what God's part is. And I just want to ask this kind of question at the same time. Is it possible to be in two or more seasons at the same time?
Mhm.
Because I think we think like everything should just go in this nice, easy flow, but yet sometimes it feels like, I feel like I'm back and forth or in between or in a couple different at the same time.
Yeah, and also like it can be 95 degrees in Iowa one day and then, a few days later it's like 30 or something
Right?
ridiculous, right? And so and life isn't linear like the natural seasons. We don't just naturally go from spring to summer to fall to winter and go back around. We go in and out of seasons. I
Mm,
do try when I lead women through the Growing Slow Way at conferences and retreats. I do try to get women to identify a primary season that they are in to
okay.
begin to understand and just dwell in the season they are in rather than rushing out of it. However, I think a lot of women do struggle to find the one season they are in because
Mm,
maybe as, an empty nester, they feel like they're in the harvest season, but they just started a new job so that they're in a
mm,
spring season. I think the main idea that I would encourage women to think about right now if they're trying to find a season is just to be aware that God is working in you and growing you through seasons. You don't have to like land on one and stay there for a few months. I think just be open to the possibility that whatever season you are in any different area of your life, that God is growing you through it and to give him the time to work out what he's leading you to
mm.
in those particular seasons.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, right? Because it doesn't always like picture perfect, like the Instagram feed that we were
Mhm.
talking about, look like it all lines up and looks that way. And yet, like we've talked about, there is beauty and purpose behind every single season in that process, and we do need to cycle through all of them and not avoid certain ones. So I love this. I mean, my heart is so encouraged, and I love even more getting to have a in real life conversation with you. So let's just kind of wrap this up by bringing it back to our time, right? How does following the ancient way of growing slow really affect our time, this time that we've been given that we're called to steward, and the ways in which we're using that?
It helps you savor.
Mm,
When you grow slow, you are have an increased awareness of the beauty that God has given around you. Every morning since I adopted this growing slow way of living, I just when I wake up, I take a little bit more time to just set the tone for my day and just ask the Lord, what would you have for me this day? And how can I pay attention to the gifts that I've been given? Oftentimes I'll stand at the back windows and see the backyard and how pretty it is. And I think, who but I will thank God for this view? Who but
mm,
I will be able to, thank him and savor the things that he has given only me to see. And this is a way of stewarding our time well to be appreciative of the gifts that he has given us, to steward our time with our children by looking at them eye to eye, to steward our time with our work by giving it all as if unto the Lord, as it says in the scriptures, to steward our time by saying goodnight to the office every night, to steward our time by enjoying the gifts of things like food instead of racing through meals or eating out of a sack. Instead, sit down and taste the flavors and the textures. God could have decided to fuel our bodies at gas tanks or through like a pill every morning.
mm.
Instead, he said, you know what? I'm going to give you taste buds and flavors, and savoring these things is being a good steward of the time and the gifts that God has given to us.
What a beautiful picture. And that's how we fully enjoy, right? In the savoring, that's where the joy comes, because we're present to those things in the moment. So, what a beautiful thing. So, what's just one piece of encouragement that you would give to that woman listening right now who's suffering from hurry sickness? She's like, okay, Lissa, Jennifer, this sounds amazing. I want to move to a farm right now. Like I want to slow down my life, but just kind of where do I even start? What would just be one thing you would say to encourage her and help her take that first step?
Start with the square inches under your own
Mm,
feet. It is not about a farm. It is not about the fact that I can look for miles across these fields and see nothing but green. It is about what's happening on the inside of me. I can fall into, when I had hurry sickness, keep in mind, I was living on a farm.
mm,
I was not savoring. I was not being a good steward of my body or my time or my relationships. It is literally an inside job.
mm,
And the only person that can make that change is you. And the only way you can do it is through the power of the Holy Spirit. So
mm.
trust that there may be some hard decisions ahead for you. You may disappoint people with your nose. You may need to resist the urge to expand your fences. But hear me say that you will not lose your edge. You will not, um, suddenly become unproductive and useless in your work. I have seen my entire life, every aspect of my life change for the better because I adopted growing slow, one practical piece at a time, and you can too.
Yeah, what a beautiful challenge and reminder and truth, right? And I often talk about it's not about productivity. God did not create us to be machines and just to be, spitting out, products at the
Mhm.
end of a assembly line. He's called us to purposivity, right? There is a purpose behind the time He's given us, the fields He's put us in, the seeds He's put in our hands, and yeah, and it like you said, it produces even more when we are in partnership with Him in that direction. So I love this. We could talk all day. I know we've only scratched the surface of what this book shares. So of course, I highly recommend our listeners go grab the book on Amazon or Kindle or Audible. And I know you've got other resources. So like maybe like where can we point them for other things that can help support them as they're growing?
We also have a Growing Slow Bible study that I think
Ooh.
your listeners might be interested in that helps them to relate it to their lives in a really practical way. And there are free videos with the Bible study. They're on my website. There's a code inside the workbook. And we filmed, fun fact, those videos over the course of the 4 seasons on our farm.
Mm.
So it took a year and we did it through every season. And I even have a session where we talk about that big rock I was telling you about. And it's very cinematic, and there you get to see what I've been trying to describe today
Yeah.
on the videos. And then you can find everything about growing slow at growingslowbook.com. And I have a ton of freebies to anybody who signs up for my email list. You can go to jenniferdukeslee.com and then click on the freebies tab. There's lock screens, videos, worksheets, uh, hundreds of free things for you to use.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you wrote this book slowly. You did this videos for the Bible study slowly. Like you are like
Mhm.
literally living this out and being present in the season that you needed to be in for what was coming from that. So I will make sure to link those in the show notes. And as always, I invite you as my guest into the Redeemer Time community where we can continue the conversation, right? And really start putting down roots because we can hear something great, but chances are we're gonna, hit stop, and life is gonna happen, and we're gonna be off to the next thing. And I really want to see the growth happen because we're rooted in the right place. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing your wisdom with us today. I know a lot of women are going to be blessed by our conversation. And in closing, I always like to ask my guests this one question just to get into your heart and calendar. So, as you are thinking about the season that you're in, what is one thing that you desire to make time for in this season of your life or business or ministry? And what impact will that have?
Relationships for me are where it's at right now. I am soaking up every minute I can with my daughters, knowing that this time is precious and that I can't grab hold of them and keep them near me. And so that's been a huge priority is time with my daughters. And
Mhm.
another huge priority is time with my mom.
Mhm.
Tonight at 7 p.m. when after I've had supper and gotten packed, I'm driving 4 hours and I'm spending several days with my mom. And I'm saying goodnight to this office and I won't see her again for a long time. My mom is 85 years old and time
Mhm.
is precious. So
Yeah.
for me right now, it's all about relationship.
Wow. What a beautiful way to invest your time that will have kingdom impact as well. So pray blessing over that time with both your
Thank
girls
you.
and your mom. And thank you so much for blessing us today and being our guest on the Redeemer Time podcast.
Thank you.